Welcome to the Social Change Diaries, the show that looks behind the curtain at everything you want to know about the social justice and nonprofit landscape. I'm your host, Vanessa Wakeman. Hello and welcome to the Social Change Diaries. We are almost at the end of our season on leadership, just 2 more episodes, and I hope that you enjoy today. Today we are speaking with Jeremy Heimans. Jeremy is the co-founder and CEO of Purpose, a global organization headquartered in New York that builds and supports movements for a more open, just, and habitable world. Purpose has advised organizations such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Google, and UNICEF. He is co-founder of GetUp, an Australian political organization with more members than all of Australia's political parties combined, and Avaaz, the world's largest online citizens movement, now with nearly 50 million members worldwide. Heimans is a recipient of the Ford Foundation's 75th Anniversary Visionary Award for his work as a movement pioneer and chaired the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on Civic Participation. He has been named one of Fast Company's most creative people in business, and The Monthly has observed that Heimans might be the most influential Australian in the world. With Henry Timms, Jeremy is co-author of the 2018 bestseller, New Power. Their thinking on New Power has been featured as the big idea in Harvard Business Review, and Jeremy's TED Talk on the topic has been viewed more than 1.4 million times. Jeremy was educated at Harvard University and the University of Sydney and began his career at McKinsey and Company. Jeremy, thank you for joining me on the Social Change Diaries. I first learned of your work through an article in the Harvard Business Review about the concept of New Power, which you created with your partner, Henry Timms. And I really see so many opportunities to sort of explore the concept of New Power in the nonprofit sector, which is where we work primarily. So thank you so much for joining me.
It's great to be here.
So, Jeremy, I know that you have been talking, I'm sure, a lot about the idea of leadership. You, along with Henry Timms, have a book out called New Power, How Power Works in Our Hyperconnected World and How to Make It Work for You. That idea, that concept really resonated with me as I think about how we see power shifting and sort of some of the conversations that I'm having with leaders or with professionals just about how they can really have impact and affect change in the work that they're doing. So it really represents a shift from the old guard. Can you explain to us what New Power is and what it looks like in today's world?
Yeah, well, look, new power, I feel like, is all around us, and it's a new way to think about the exercise of power. We often use the comparison of Harvey Weinstein, the archetype of old power, someone who used power ruthlessly as a currency in order to protect himself, to punish his enemies, to reward his friends, and therefore maintain this position despite all of this abuse and harassment. And contrast that to the Me Too movement, which is an expression of new power. The Me Too movement is a kind of power that works less like a currency and more like a current, right? It's a kind of power that surges. It gets stronger the more people get involved. No one person can capture it, can hoard it, but instead people learn to channel its energy. And so that's what we think of as new power. And the reality is that these are just 2 ways to get things done in the world today. And you see very positive, but also very negative manifestations of both forms of power. So, you think of Me Too as one manifestation of new power, but you can also think of the way that terrorist groups like ISIS are spreading their ideologies in this very peer-to-peer way as a very negative manifestation of new power.
Right. So thinking our season is focused on leadership. And to me, leadership is traditionally connected to power. Like, there's this sort of the small group of people where sort of they're controlling what's happening. And so do you think that organizations could be more successful if they were open to the concept of new power and like what those structures could potentially look like in their organizations?
Yeah, well, I mean, thinking about leaders, right? Clearly, the leaders that are learning these new power skills are the ones who are getting ahead. So, you think about Obama, but you also think about Trump. So to think about these two figures, so Obama, became president because he understood how to rally a crowd. He was incredibly effective at raising all of that money in these small donations. He got millions of us to volunteer. He inspired so many people. Now, I think he used new power to get elected. Once he became president, he was a little bit trapped by the old power dynamics of his office. And I think one of the limitations was that at the end of those 8 years, even though he was still very popular with the people who'd elected him, the movement he built didn't quite move without him. So he was unable to transfer a lot of that energy to his successor, Hillary Clinton. And then in turn, you see a guy like Donald Trump who is using new power in a different way, but he's kind of creating this anarchic crowd, this crowd of people spreading his ideas, spreading ideas that he feeds off. You could think of it as a kind of decentralized social media army that creates this kind of engine of intensity for him, right? Where people are kind of worked up and made more and more intense in their support for him. And that's a use of new power. But he's actually doing that in service of a very old power set of values. So, he's saying, look, I want all my supporters to fan out in a very distributed way in support of my ideas, to unleash their agency and creativity. But ultimately, I'm the strong man. I'm here. I alone can fix it. And I'm here to restore order and hierarchy, or a particular kind of hierarchy. So, it's really interesting, these different leadership strategies that we're seeing in the world today. And, that I think is the opportunity for leaders today is to think, how do I rally a crowd, right? How do I not just rely on my formal authority? How do I not just rally the people inside my organization, but develop a capacity to mobilize? If you're in business, it might be your consumers, it might be your suppliers, it might be this whole ecosystem around you in service of what you're doing. And so, in the book, we talk a lot about leadership and the kinds of leaders who are doing that well. Interestingly, in the early years of his papacy, Pope Francis did that very well in many ways, in terms of challenging the power structures of the church, maybe less well at the moment. You see business leaders doing it in interesting ways. And so it's a set of skills. And again, as I just showed you with Donald Trump and Barack Obama, it can be used for good or for not so good, depending on your political views. For me, the way Donald Trump has used new power is unleashing a lot of very negative outcomes, but it's nevertheless very important for us to reckon with it.
So, Jeremy, are there particular elements that are needed? Like if we were doing a new power sort of stew, like what needs to be involved? Like, does it start with that one person who sort of gives, like has the vision and then allows other people to buy into it and support him? Like what needs to go into it? Like I think in some of the more formal leadership structures, there's a very sort of structured sort of organization about like, okay, these are the steps. And like we have this one person and, then there's the people under them. Like how does one sort of take the new power and make it grow? Like what does that look like?
Yeah, well, I think it's really interesting, isn't it? The way, we're used to a world of institutions, but a lot of these new forms of leadership are divorced from big institutions. So, you think about a movement like Black Lives Matter or a movement like Me Too. The Black Lives Matter founders, we talk a bunch about them in our book, they see their movement not as leaderless, but as leaderful, right? There are many leaders. That leadership is distributed. And if you want to talk to the leader of Black Lives Matter, you can't, because there are too many of these leaders. Like, there are leaders everywhere, and no one is an appointed leader with authority over the rest. And so there's an interesting new capacity that more traditionally structured organizations need to develop, but how to work with those new movements, how to harness their energy, right? Because it is a different kind of structure and a different kind of energy. Now, within established organizations, you can still bring some of these leadership principles, into the way you operate. You can really try to do this work of pushing power down into your institution and out beyond your four walls. And that is a set of skills that, is a little different to what the Black Lives Matter founders are doing, but nonetheless parallels some of these.
So I have so many thoughts and questions sort of running through my head just as I'm listening to you talk about new power. And thank you so much for those great examples. When I'm having conversations about power, I'm noticing how people often shy away from the term. Oftentimes people are looking at power from the concept of power over, but I like to think about power as more collaborative and transformative, as in the power to or power with. New Power seems to embrace that actual approach, like power with. How do we sort of do this and create transformation together? From a social change perspective, should nonprofit organizations be more open to this as a path to solving social issues quicker? And so I know that a lot of the organizations that we work with sort of operate within a traditional power structure. So I guess the bigger question here is, can traditional power and new power coexist?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the work here is really learning how to use new power and old power together and when to use which one. So you think about an organization like the NRA, and, you know, again, unfortunately, wearing my own views on my sleeve, they are very good at both old and new power and know how to use them in combination. So they have this kind of fearsome old power brand. Everybody quivers in their boots at the very thought of crossing them. They're perceived to have a lot of old power, right? A lot of that traditional top-down ability to affect outcomes. At the same time, they are very good at mobilizing a kind of large, more amorphous grassroots ecosystem around them. So not just their members, but actually this whole world of gun clubs and activist groups and message boards and blogs that are kind of fomenting this gun rights ideology, creating intensity at the grassroots that they can then harness at these critical moments. And one of the reasons they're effective is they don't try to control or rein in a lot of that grassroots activity. In fact, they encourage this kind of relatively unconstrained, even sometimes chaotic kind of tableau of activity that strengthens their organization, even though they can't fully control the forces that surround them.
Got it. And then shifting gears a little bit here, there's been tremendous amount of dialogue happening around this idea of diversity and inclusion and equity in pretty much every sector. Where do you think New Power has the potential to play a role there, if any? I'm just thinking about, again, you mentioned Me Too. We've definitely seen how impactful that has been. But in sort of going back to this traditional organizational, institutional model where most people are working, how do you think those issues around, equity and how we are making sure that we have diversity and inclusion in the workplace, how do you think New Power plays a role in that?
Well, I certainly think you're seeing these dynamics. So, you've got this generation of people with an expectation that they are going to participate, they're going to shape their world. When they see a company like Google with the recent scandal around the payouts they were making to executives who'd been accused of harassment, you saw this incredible response by the employees who literally walk out in response to this. And so, companies that basically just try to throw lawyers at a problem or issue a carefully worded statement or anything like that, those companies are going to be very vulnerable in these moments. And so I think that is an example of these dynamics at play. I think, look, to be clear, power dynamics in society will be replicated everywhere. So they'll be replicated online, they'll be replicated in movements. So we can't get around some of those things so easily. However, these new power dynamics do allow these people who've been traditionally marginalized to combine their voices much more effectively, at much greater scale, much more quickly, and across geography in such a way where they can start to counterbalance, institutional power. And you see that dynamic playing out both within organizations, where it would have been more challenging for employees to kind of rise up against the company, in another context. But you also see it, of course, out in the wider world with movements like Me Too and others. And
Jeremy, last question. What are your predictions about leadership structures? What do you think we're going to be seeing in the next 5 to 10 years? Will we sort of have embraced new power? Will there be some sort of hybrid of different models? Like, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, look, I think the reality is this is going to continue to be a dialectic, right? You're not going to just have new power replace the old. You're going to have this kind of battle and balancing of the two forces. So what we argue is not new power good, old power bad, but rather, like, if you want to be effective in the 21st century as a leader, you need to learn this set of skills. And so really a lot of our book is about what it takes to survive and thrive in this new environment. And that doesn't just mean throwing out everything you learned about the old power world. It really more means learning a set of new power skills and a new power mindset that kind of works effectively alongside a world that is still dominated by institutions, it's still dominated by the trappings of old power.
Where can people find out more information about you and your book and the other things that you have going on?
Yeah, so people can go to the website thisisnewpower.com, thisisnewpower.com, and to find out more about my work, which is in movement building around the world and helping organizations create movements and create new power, they can go to purpose.com.
Beautiful. I thank you for taking some time out. I know we had an abbreviated interview, but really excited to talk to you. And I'm sure that a lot of our listeners will appreciate your insights about this topic.
Thanks, Vanessa. It's been great talking.
Today's episode is a call to action to every listener. I hope that new power becomes the norm, and I do believe, as Jeremy shared, that new power and traditional power or old power can coexist, although I'd like to see more new power in play. As I think about the nonprofit sector, I see a number of ways that new power can be used as an accelerator for solving social issues. I'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback about opportunities within your organization or for causes that you care about where new power can be asserted. As always, if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a review on iTunes and tell a friend about the Social Change Diaries. Next week is our final episode of the season, so make sure you tune in. I will be joined by Patrice Tonica from Joyful Planet, and I can't wait to have that conversation. Thank you.